So I'm with Guy. I'm not going to try and pronounce your surname. You pronounce your surname. I'm with Guy,
Pigounakis,
and you are
Commercial Director, MG UK.
MG. So we're here to drive the new MG HS, and you were very kindly doing a presentation this morning. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was you talking about the ZEV mandate and how that's affecting yourselves, obviously, but also you touched a little bit on the wider market as well. Tell us a little bit about what you told us this morning, because it's something I think that affects not only the industry but the consumer as well. And I think it's a really fascinating subject. So first of all, how has it impacted you guys?
Well, in fairness, we can afford to be fairly relaxed about it, in so much as the mix of vehicles that we sell is significantly in excess of the minimum requirement of the ZEV mandate. So is it affecting the way we take our cars to market? Is it affecting how we're orientating our business? Today, it's not. And we're confident that for the foreseeable future, we can meet all the requirements, even though they ramp up quite significantly in subsequent years, we can meet those requirements quite comfortably in years to come. So from our point of view, very little impact at all.
Is this down to preparedness? Obviously, you launched the MG EV4, which MG4 EV, which is very well received, and I think has been selling very well. Were you planning ahead for this? Do you think that some other manufacturers have sort of not been were they anticipating that it wouldn't happen, or it might be put off? And were you ahead of the game? What do you think?
I'd love to say we were, but I think it's a happy coincidence.
Right.
The truth to be known.
Fair enough. That's
Especially
good.
as the UK is unique in having this bit of legislation
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
I mean, the MG4, you're absolutely right, came along at optimum time
Yeah.
from that point of view. And of course, the MG4 success, sort of launches a whole discussion about why was it so successful, pricing of electric cars, brand, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So whilst I'd love to suggest that, we spent hours and hours and hours planning about how we could take full advantage of the ZEV mandate, it is genuinely a happy coincidence.
But one thing you just touched on there was that it's hit us here in the UK, because this is unique to us, isn't
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. You've still got the CAFE regulations as we grew to know and love, affecting mainland Europe.
So, do you think this or something similar is going to be rolled out across Europe as well, or are they doing their own thing?
Well, I mean, that's a very political question, and I guess, with post-Brexit, there's no linkage whatsoever. I mean, the current government's already indicated, for instance, that it sees no reason to follow the EU's lead, if you like, on tariffs from Chinese electric car imports. So I don't really see any reason why they would adopt
Have they
this in
said
Europe.
that?
There was a statement from a government minister saying they saw no immediate need to follow mainland Europe's lead.
So this is a big sigh
tariffs.
of relief for you guys.
Well, it's not exactly a policy statement, but yeah, it was something we were more pleased to hear than not. Let's put
But
it that way.
doesn't that put the UK in quite a unique situation where we're flanked by Europe on one side and America on the other, which I think is going to be like 100% tariff on Chinese cars. Does that give us an opportunity, or does that just present a unique case of the market?
Well, I think in terms of, yes, it placed us in a unique opportunity, but I guess Brexit was always about that, wasn't it? Putting us in a position where we could have different trade arrangements with different nation states around the world, and hopefully take advantage of the opportunities that presented. Without getting into the politics of it, whether that's happened or not, there'll be polarized views on one side or the other. But I don't think we should be surprised that we don't necessarily choose to follow the same route as our European cousins have chosen to in any sphere of business or commerce, to be perfectly honest.
It's very interesting. Now, in terms of the market here and what has happened with the ZEV mandate, how do you think that is influencing the market in general?
Yeah. Well, whereas I said earlier on, and it is the case that we are comfortable with what's going on, I'd be slightly disingenuous to suggest that it hasn't affected us in absolute terms, because if you look at the ZEV mandate and the general difficulties in the electric car market overall.
Expand on those.
Well, I guess I'm talking about, not the collapse of the electric car market, because actually in absolute numbers, the volume is up. But what we're seeing is a polarization of sales in the electric car market. The strong market, of course, is the one that benefits from a personal taxation P11D basis for company car drivers, and the tax write-down opportunities for those companies. So you've got the corporate sector, and you've got a very different level of performance going on in the retail sector. So the retail sector is the one that has felt the real impact of the fall off in demand for electric cars.
What do you think is causing that, particularly in the retail sector?
I think there's two factors. Obviously, there's no particular financial incentive for retail customers to buy electric.
All the
cars
subsidies
from.
are gone.
All the subsidies are gone. Whereas, of course,
And actually taxation is coming back onto EVs.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, in the corporate sector, I mean, let's face it, I've been driving an electric car now for about 7 years. I do a big mileage in electric cars, and I love driving electric cars. But the thing that prompted me to drive an electric car, because I've been in the fortunate position I can have any car I want, basically, as long as it's from the manufacturer I work for, clearly.
So cyberstir it is then.
I couldn't possibly comment. At my age, I'd be lucky to get in and out of it. But
You'll be fine.
yeah, I'll manage. It's amazing what you can put up with. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the retail market, you've got a number of factors impacting on it. And actually, and we do measure these things quite closely, without sort of pointing fingers, there has been a concerted media push against electric cars that have been going on from late last year up until the last couple of months ago, when obviously more important things have come to the fore, and frankly people get bored of listening to the same story too many times. I mean, from electric cars are too heavy to go to bridges, to the famous Luton car park fire, which most people still think was caused by electric car, to you're more likely, what did I see last week, you're more likely to be run over and killed by someone driving an electric car than a petrol car. And you think to yourself, really, what else can you make up? But the fact of the matter
And
is,
that's despite the fact that now it's a mandate to have a sound in the car,
Yes.
so you should be able to hear it. But what do you think is causing that then? What do you? I
don't know. I mean,
do you think there's an agenda there? Do you think the media is out there? Or do you think the
really don't
media
know.
is being driven by the popularity of the misconceptions that are in the market? Is that what's happening?
I genuinely don't know. I mean, I discussed this with a lot of people in the media, outside of the media, and it's fairly isolated, but the media that have been putting this message across are also quite influential media. It seems to die down a little bit, but the other factor, and we know that has had an impact on people, shaking their confidence. The other factor which is affecting retail customers, of course, and you can't ignore this, is the cost of living crisis.
Yes.
And if you look at the sales of cars in the retail sector at the moment, you get your premium products are doing rather quite well. And if you talk to bankers, finance people, they'll say that the people with some money have actually doing okay at the moment. Probably got a little bit more money than they might have had in the past. And the people that frankly are struggling are really struggling. So it's the same old thing as you saw in the supermarkets a few years ago, when that expression, the squeezed middle, came out. You've got, at one end, you've got your Waitrose and your Marks and Spencer's food halls doing very, very well. At the other end, you've got people doing very well, and the traditional big volume supermarkets, the middle, find them squeezed from downwards and upwards pressure. And I think you're seeing that in our market a little bit at the moment. The people that are offering genuinely good value for money are doing okay. The people that are offering a premium product at a premium price are genuinely doing okay. And the people in the middle are struggling a bit.
Do you think this is why you did well with the MG4?
Well, I think...
Because that came in at the right sort of price level, didn't it?
Well, I think the key element of electric cars is if you can achieve price parity with a petrol car,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you buy an electric car? As long as the range anxiety issue
Yeah.
is not an issue. And for some people, it is an issue. And for some people, still charging the car is an issue. 40% of households don't have access to a domestic charger. So in some parts of the country, that will be an issue. Others, far less so. So I think affordability is one of the key drivers to electric car adoption by retail customers. And you just said it yourself. The MG4 actually achieved price parity with its competitors in the petrol, diesel, hybrid market.
The other thing that I found talking to
Plus it's a good
consumers,
car.
it was. I reviewed it and I
Yes,
did like
I
it.
did.
Yes. But also talking to consumers, I think there's also. So we had, for example, when EVs came along, we had the early adopters.
Yeah.
And these are people that are in a good position and they're able to do that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But then when you trickle down to the secondary adopters and then the tertiary adopters, if you like, they become a little bit more discerning because they're more about the value and does it really fit into my lifestyle and can it really work for me? Do you think that that's also part of the problem? Is that the people now the reality of and actually living with the car is starting to hit the EV market?
Yeah, I think, the people we talk to who've gone down that route and have got an electric car, love them. There's a degree of trepidation by lots of people about getting into an electric car in the first place. What am I letting myself into? I like the idea of it. I like the sound of it. I want to get into it. And actually, once people make that step, I've never spoken to anybody that actually regrets the way the car drives. You are going to find some range anxiety issues, without doubt. But the biggest issue absolutely is the affordability of the car from the outset.
Affordability of the car.
Now, we touched on tariffs earlier on. and we talked about the ZEV mandate. I mean, the one thing that the ZEV mandate is forcing manufacturers to do is to discount, or some manufacturers to discount the price of their cars quite aggressively in some instances. That arguably makes them more accessible and more affordable for a wider range of people. So it'd be interesting to see, when that starts to become the norm rather than the exception, how that runs out. And you've got to say to yourself, at some point, the pressure of reducing prices in terms of incentive spend should be replaced by new models being introduced. And what I would describe is a sensible price in the first place. Because, candidly, if you look at a typical family electric car, it's a £46,000 car now.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Somehow we in the industry have decided that's the norm.
Yeah.
And that's somehow acceptable. In my world, and, I'm in a better position than many people, I'd say the £46,000 car is an expensive car.
It is an expensive car. Yeah.
But
we are in an era where, in my mind still today, if you said to me, what's a good mid-range car? I'd say Ford Focus, how much will it cost? Oh, about 16, 17 grand. No chance.
No, I know.
No chance.
I know.
In my head, I'm still thinking like that. But you're talking about 26, 27 grand minimum for a car like that.
Absolutely.
The prices have all leapt up and across
but look
the
how
range.
quickly some of those prices have come down.
So
Pressure.
we had this price war last year, didn't we? Which Tesla sort of kicked off, particularly when it related to EVs. That had a big knock-on effect, and this is what I wanted to ask you about, because the profit margins, as I understand it, are much tighter with EVs, and particularly when you come down to the smaller cars.
Yes.
I mean, with the ZEV mandate and with that price war that we're either going to have or we're going to see the continuation of, is it going to put an undue amount of pressure on manufacturers, on dealerships to survive?
Well, of course, that is part of the discussion, I guess, that's driven the whole tariff conversation in the first place. That's where it started. But it's interesting how many manufacturers, having claimed they couldn't possibly build an electric car for less than £25,000. I mean, I've lost count of the amount that have been announced that are going to be launched in the next 9, 12, 15 months. So all of a sudden, all these people that were saying it was impossible have found a way to do it.
But aren't they taking a loss on those?
I very much doubt it. Very much doubt it. I mean, you see the headlines, and I've worked for another number of manufacturers in my time over the past, and in your national sales company or your importer, whatever you work for, it's about P&L, it's about volume, and yes, you're very, very focused on it. And, you hear manufacturers saying their profits are being depressed. How many manufacturers, very recently, have you seen that have announced a massive reduction in their profitability? Not many. Where...
But then are they controlling the market? Are they controlling the supply a bit more? Are they reducing the amount of cars? You touched on this actually in your presentation, didn't you? That we may see we may see a restriction in the sale of cars.
Well, for the last 3 years, less so last year, because we moved from an undersupply situation to an oversupply situation in the industry. In the last 2 years prior to last December, it would not have been at all uncommon for a manufacturer to stop supply of petrol cars to maximise their CO2 efficiency for the CAFE regulations. So I wouldn't be at all surprised, back to your comment about profitability, if a number of manufacturers start restricting the supply of A and B segment cars, small cars with thin margins in. You'd rather sacrifice the volume on those and take an actual reduction in your overall volume to ramp up the percentage mix you've got of pure electric or hydrogen zero emission cars within it. So, you wouldn't necessarily sort of restrict supply of a car that you might be making a very healthy margin in. You'll restrict supply of your smaller cars that you have less margin. Now that, of course, is a retail car.
It's a retail car. You are limiting choice for the consumer. A lot of consumers want smaller cars.
And the dealers are very, very dependent from their bottom line about selling retail cars. And it's the most profitable channel for a manufacturer as well, is selling a retail car. So you mentioned it earlier on about the ramifications for dealers. There are ramifications for dealers. There are ramifications for dealers because their volume retail cars are becoming more and more difficult to source. They're under pressure from some manufacturers to register mixes of electric cars which fall outside of natural demand. You know as well as I do that the residual value of lots of electric cars has taken an absolute hammering over the last couple of months. So dealers are having to register and self-register electric cars to meet their mix requirements, which they're then taking an absolute hiding on in terms of disposing of that car second-hand.
This is not sustainable though, surely.
No, I don't. I think, it's a difficult one because I should be sitting here really in my position saying I think it's absolutely brilliant, this legislation. I'd be disgusted if the government backed
No, but I like it. You're being realistic and you're giving me an honest view on the market.
But if
I mean, crystal ball gazing, If you were to look at best case scenario, worst case scenario, say next year or end of next year, what do you foresee?
Well, I kind of sort of think to myself, I'd love to see an incentive brought in to encourage retail customers to buy electric cars.
So do you mean subsidies again?
Well, not as a subsidy, but certainly a grant or something like that. But to be perfectly honest with you, especially with the announcements that have been made this week about, the 22 billion pounds.
It's not going to happen, is it?
I
It's not
cannot
gonna-
see it
no,
happening.
no.
I can see, I can see the.
And actually, I find with some consumers, there's actually a little bit of a backlash. Because they're almost like, well, why should the electric car drivers get free
Yeah,
rides?
yeah.
So it's almost
Yeah.
like there's a negative aspect
Well,
to
I
it as well.
think when it was £5,000 a few years ago,
Yeah.
the view very much was, why should we subsidise expensive cars for people that can already afford them?
Yeah.
And I completely agree. If I was looking at it dispassionately from a non-industry point of view, I'd say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Why should you? If that was any other industry or any other field of commerce, I'd have an issue with that.
Yeah.
So I can't complain about that attitude. But I think, back to what are the ramifications? Do I see any fundamental change? I'm not sure I do, because this government is more focused on 2030 than the previous government would have been. It's clearly investing massively in green technology, or it intends to invest in green technology. To a certain extent, they are getting, and okay, this isn't legislation that the current government brought in, but they're getting the result they want, because cars are becoming cheaper. Manufacturers are pushing electric cars into the market to a certain extent. Even if some of those electric cars become second-hand electric cars very quickly and take the massive hit on residuals that they are, that still benefits the end user.
It does.
And
To be fair, I do advise a lot of consumers, like, if you're going to try and getting into an EV, buy a 1-year-old, 2-year-old car.
Well, or buy it on a PCP, where somebody else is taking the risk of,
True.
and that's the other thing that worries me slightly. If you look at, what happened in the States with Hertz, for instance, where
This was interesting because another thing that you mentioned, which I thought was certainly my ears sort of perked up at that, was that rental companies are not taking EVs.
no,
That's fundamental because they're a major chunk of the market.
big chunk of the market. They are taking tiny numbers.
Is it just because they find it difficult to?
No, their consumers don't want them.
They don't want them.
No, and you kind of get it, especially ones that do airport rentals, which is a big part of the business. Someone comes in from their 8-hour flight from the States.
They don't want the hassle of going and charging it.
No. I mean, it's challenging enough for us sometimes, let's face it. So I do kind of get that. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think the other risk of those residual values dropping benefit to the customer. And, if I was buying a car myself, I'd let someone else take the hit. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. If you're a rental company, a leasing company, a bank, a finance company, you'd be looking at your fleet of electric cars right now, looking at your exposure and saying, do I need to start ramping up the RVs to protect myself? So you can see it's very hard to know how this is going to play out, because I don't think we've seen the end of this by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I think to me, it still feels like manufacturers, dealers, the industry is sort of still feeling its way.
Yeah.
I have not seen it as uncertain now.
No.
I've never seen it as uncertain as it is now.
I'd agree with you. As I said, from our point of view, I'm not remotely concerned. I actually genuinely feel sorry for some manufacturers, because, if you take some, Toyota's a perfect example. I think they've done a fantastic job building, lean burn hybrid engines, as are some of Stellantis brands, in fairness. And under CAFE regulations, that was absolutely perfectly acceptable. And right across Europe, it still is. It counts for nothing now in the UK. And that's a bit harsh. Does it benefit us? Yes. So my sympathy is tempered, if you like, with opportunity.
So overall, you would say you're pretty optimistic about the future, because there are some people that say, well, this is a doomsday scenario for the car industry, because with the restrictions that are being applied on them in terms of the ZEV mandate and the fact that consumers don't want EVs, they're being forced to make them. Ultimately, what choice have you got? Either to reduce profitability and take a loss, or to shut up shop?
Well, at the end of the day, you've got to bear in mind that the UK is an important market, but it's just one market for global, and all the manufacturers are global manufacturers. So, if you take a little bit of a hit in one market, you're probably doing well in another market.
Right.
If you look at the portfolio of cars we've got, we can pick and mix, if you like, from a whole range of cars that are built for the global market that we don't have here. So, we can react very, very quickly to changing market conditions. I mean, we'll be bringing in a pure petrol version of the MG3 hybrid, for instance. So we're quite lucky from that point of view, perhaps luckier than some manufacturers, but most manufacturers are in a position to do this. We could go 100% electric well below, but well before 2030, if that's what the market and legislation demanded. We can introduce more petrol, hybrid, plug-in vehicles between now and then if the market went in that direction. And some manufacturers have started doing that. Whether they continue that, if the 2030...
Do you think, because you have touched on some of the, I understand if you don't want to mention any manufacturers, but do you think some manufacturers are going to have to pull out of the UK or are teetering?
I mean, there's been quite a lot of chit-chat about that. And it's not impossible, because let's face it, 4 or 5 years ago, Mitsubishi pulled out.
Yeah.
And they were selling 33,000 vehicles a year, and everybody said that would never happen. So is it out of the question? No, it's probably not. And someone somewhere on the other side of the world or in mainland Europe might be looking at a marginal volume UK operator that has to observe all the legislation and thinking, actually, is it worth our while? If the UK, in splendid isolation, is holding on to this piece of legislation, it's not impossible. But I really...
Do you think that there may be any easing off of this legislation going forward? I know there are percentages that increase, right up to 2030, up to 80% by that time. Do you think that they might change that, or do you think this government is like, no, this is what we're sticking to? Because they've rolled it back. They rolled the 2035 deadline back to 2030, haven't they? So,
I think they'll stick at what they've got, because actually, to them, why should they care if manufacturers are discounting cars, offering customers cars at a better price, eroding the manufacturer's profitability? If all of a sudden some global manufacturer is posting their global profits and say we're now losing money, we're looking at our entire global operation, maybe they'll start to take a bit of notice, but no one's anywhere near that. So why should the government do anything that's going to cost them any money to address that problem when they seem to be getting partly the result they look for? I might not like it, my colleagues and other manufacturers might not like it, but I'm trying to look at it from their point of view and saying, I've got the £22 billion hole in my finances. Why am I going to subsidize manufacturers that make billions of US dollars of profit every quarter around the world? And I probably find that quite a hard decision to sell to my colleagues in cabinet.
So final point for our consumers, the technology with EVs the progress is just far more rapid than we ever saw with ICE. I know it's difficult for you to say, but is this the right time to get into an EV, or should we be waiting to see just what's around the corner?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
Because even your progression, honestly, as a brand, and I'm not just saying that because we're sitting here in an MG10, but the progression that we've just seen, even in the last couple of years, has been phenomenal. I mean, you're completely changing your range right now. And this car is a huge step up. This new HS is a huge step up from the one that you had before, which was already a bestseller.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you like it.
So the progression is just incredible, right?
I mean, those are petrol cars, obviously, and hybrids and plug-ins. Well, plug-ins and then hybrids in the fullness of time. In electric cars specifically, I mean,
but like here, for example, a plug-in, sorry to interrupt you again, but 72 miles per hour, was it 72 miles per hour range?
75 miles.
75 miles per hour range on the EV alone, which I don't think anybody else is doing that. I think the highest I've heard till now was 50. I think
there's a couple of manufacturers who've just announced they're bringing cars in, and that has big ramifications on benefit in kind for company car users. So, that's a bit of a magic number that people will aim for, and hopefully is a USP that we can, we can exploit certainly in the short medium term. You're right, but I guess there's always been that innovation and always been that change, isn't there? You never buy a laptop, you never buy a camera. Look at this piece of kit you're using now. I've never seen anything like it. It's fantastic. And 2 years ago that probably didn't exist, or a year ago that didn't exist. If I was hedging my bets, I'd always buy a car on a PCP anyway, because then it's somebody else's problem.
And you can always update to the latest one.
Exactly, exactly.
Awesome.
But that's not necessarily a recommendation, clearly. It's just what I would do.
Thank you so much for your honesty, and thank you so much for your expertise. Thanks for talking to me.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you properly.
Check this out, guys. It's my book. It's my first novel, and it's written for car fans like you. It's a fun political action thriller. It's full of cool cars and spectacular action. Get your copy now at Amazon.com.
A brown car.